After my daughter-in-law sold my late husband's vintage car collection without permission, I said nothing. 6 months later, I revealed my new will and watched their world crumble. They say silence is golden, but sometimes it's also the sharpest weapon you can wield. My name is Margaret Hayes, and I'm 67 years old. I spent 35 years as a registered nurse before retiring. My husband, Thomas, passed away 4 years ago from a sudden heart attack, leaving me alone in our beautiful Victorian house on Maple Street. Thomas and I had built a good life together. We were careful with money, invested wisely. And by the time we retired, we owned our home outright, had a healthy investment portfolio, and Thomas had his pride and joy, a collection of 7 classic cars he'd restored over the decades. Those cars weren't just vehicles. They were his legacy, his passion, his escape from the stress of running his own accounting firm for 40 years. When Thomas died, he left everything to me in a simple will. The house, the cars, the investments, everything. He trusted me completely. Our son, Brandon, was doing well for himself as a sales manager, or so I thought, and Thomas believed he'd never need to worry about money. How wrong we both were. Brandon is my only child. He's 42 now, married to a woman named Tiffany for the past 8 years. Tiffany is 38, blonde, always impeccably dressed, and has a smile that never quite reaches her eyes. She works as a real estate agent, though I've never been quite sure how successful she actually is. They have 2 children, my grandchildren, Emma, who's 10, and Jake, who's 7. When Thomas died, Brandon and Tiffany were appropriately sad at the funeral. They hugged me, told me they'd always be there for me, promised I'd never be alone. For the first year after Thomas passed, I managed fine on my own. I had my nursing pension, my book club, my garden, and my twice-weekly volunteer shift at the local hospital. But Brandon kept insisting I was too isolated, that the house was too big for one person, that I needed family around me. "Mom," he'd say, his voice dripping with concern that felt rehearsed, "we worry about you all alone in that big house. What if something happens? What if you fall? What if there's an emergency?" Tiffany would chime in, her hand on my arm, her perfume overwhelming. "Margaret, we have so much space. The kids would love to see more of their grandmother. And honestly, with real estate prices the way they are, it would help us so much if we could rent out our current place and move in with you. Just temporarily, of course, until we get back on our feet." Back on their feet? I didn't know they'd ever been off them. But I was lonely. I missed Thomas every single day. The house did feel empty. And I did want to spend more time with Emma and Jake. So against my better judgment, against that little voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like Thomas warning me, I said yes. That was my first mistake. They moved in 3 weeks later. At first things seemed fine, almost pleasant. The house was filled with noise again, children's laughter, the TV, the sounds of a busy family. Tiffany cooked dinner most nights, though she had a habit of making comments about how heavy or old-fashioned. My cooking was whenever I offered to help. Brandon would sit with me sometimes in the evenings, and we'd talk about his work, about the kids, about nothing particularly important. But there were signs, small things at first. Tiffany rearranging my kitchen cabinets, without asking because it just makes more sense this way. Brandon moving furniture around in the living room because the flow is better for the kids. The way Tiffany would walk through the house, touching things, measuring walls with her eyes, making little humming sounds like she was already redecorating in her mind. And then there was the garage, Thomas's sanctuary, the place where his 7 beauties lived, a 1967 Chevrolet Camaro, a 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429, a 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, a 1970 Plymouth Barracuda, a 1963 Corvette Stingray, a 1968 Dodge Charger and his absolute baby, a 1965 Shelby Cobra. He'd spent thousands of hours on those cars. Every weekend for years he'd be out there. Grease under his fingernails, a smile on his face, sometimes with Brandon helping him when Brandon was younger, before life got busy. I'd go out there sometimes after he died, just to sit in the driver's seat of the Cobra, to smell the leather and the old motor oil, to feel close to him again. Those cars were worth a fortune. Thomas had them appraised at over $800,000 combined, but their value to me was beyond money. They were all I had left of him. Tangible proof that he'd existed, that he'd loved something, that his hands had built something beautiful. Brandon knew this. He'd grown up watching his father work on those cars. He understood what they meant. Or so I thought. It started about 3 months after they moved in. I began noticing Tiffany spending a lot of time on her phone, taking pictures of things around the house. She'd walk through the garage with her phone held up, recording videos. When I asked what she was doing, she'd smile that cold smile and say, "Oh, just keeping memories. This is such a special time, all of us living together." Then one afternoon, I came home from my volunteer shift at the hospital to find Brandon and Tiffany sitting at the kitchen table, papers spread out in front of them, their expressions serious. When they saw me, they quickly gathered up the papers, but not before I caught a glimpse of what looked like debt consolidation paperwork and credit card statements with alarmingly high balances. "Everything okay?" I asked, setting down my purse. "Fine, Mom," Brandon said quickly, too quickly. "Just some work stuff." But it wasn't fine. I could see the tension in his jaw, the way Tiffany's perfectly manicured nails were digging into her palm. They were in trouble. Real trouble. That night, after the kids were in bed, they came to me. This time, they weren't hiding anything. Brandon looked ashamed. Tiffany looked determined. "Mom," Brandon started, running his hand through his hair the way he'd done since he was a little boy when he was nervous. "We need to talk to you about something. We're in a bit of a financial bind." "How bad?" I asked, my nurse's instinct already preparing for triage. Tiffany jumped in before Brandon could answer. "We owe about $75,000 in credit card debt. Brandon's company had some restructuring, and his commissions have been cut by 40%. My real estate business has been slow. You know how the market is. We've been robbing Peter to pay Paul for months, but we're drowning." I felt a chill run through me. $75,000. How does that even happen? "We were thinking," Tiffany continued, her voice taking on that sugary tone she used when she wanted something, "about the cars in the garage, Thomas's collection." My blood ran cold. "What about them?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. Brandon leaned forward. "Mom, I know those cars meant a lot to Dad. They mean a lot to me, too. But they're just sitting there. They're not being driven. They're not being enjoyed. And meanwhile, we're drowning in debt. If we sold just a few of them, we could clear everything and have a fresh start." "No," I said immediately. "Absolutely not. Those cars are not for sale." Tiffany's mask slipped just a little. I saw the flash of irritation in her eyes. "Margaret, be reasonable. They're just cars. Thomas is gone. He doesn't need them anymore. But we're here, we're alive, and we need help. Don't you care about your son's family?" "Those cars," I said slowly, clearly, "represent 40 years of your father's life, Brandon. Every bolt, every inch of paint, every piece of chrome, he put his heart into them. They're not just sitting there. They're my connection to him. And they're not for sale." The conversation ended there, but I could see I'd made enemies. Tiffany's smile was gone completely. Brandon looked desperate, and worse, resentful. They left the room without another word. I should have known they wouldn't let it go. For the next few weeks, they tried different tactics. Tiffany would make pointed comments about how the garage was wasted space that could be converted into something useful. Brandon would bring up memories of working on the cars with his dad, trying to make me feel guilty for hoarding them. They'd have loud conversations within my earshot about foreclosure, about the kids having to change schools, about how some people have the means to help but just won't. I held firm. Those cars were not for sale. Then one Tuesday morning, I had a dentist appointment, root canal, scheduled months in advance. I'd be gone for at least 3 hours, including the procedure and the recovery time. I mentioned it to Brandon at breakfast, and he just nodded absently. I should have noticed how quickly Tiffany looked up from her phone. I should have seen the glance that passed between them, but I was focused on not being nervous about the dentist, and I missed it. The procedure went fine. My mouth was numb, My head was a little foggy from the nitrous oxide, and I just wanted to go home, take some ibuprofen, and lie down. I pulled into my driveway around 2 p.m., surprised to see a large enclosed trailer parked on the street and two men I didn't recognize standing in my open garage. My heart started pounding. I got out of the car and rushed over. The Cobra was gone. The Camaro was gone. The Mustang was being carefully rolled up a ramp into the trailer. "What the hell is going on?" I tried to shout, but my numb mouth made it come out slurred. One of the men, a guy in his 50s with a clipboard, looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, we're just picking up the vehicles. We were told the owner authorized the sale." "I'm the owner," I managed to say more clearly. "I didn't authorize anything." Brandon appeared from inside the garage, and behind him, looking triumphant, was Tiffany. "Mom, calm down," Brandon said, holding up his hands like I was a wild animal he needed to soothe. "We made an executive decision. We found a collector who's paying top dollar, $850,000 for the entire collection. That's $50,000 more than Dad's appraisal. It's an amazing deal." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I looked at Tiffany, who had the audacity to smile at me. "You're welcome," she said. "I have a friend in the classic car world. He connected us with this buyer. We're saving the family, Margaret. You should be thanking us." "Stop," I said to the men. "Stop loading those cars right now. This is theft. I'm calling the police." Brandon grabbed my arm. "Mom, no, please, just listen. The buyer's money is already in our account. We've paid off all the credit cards. If you stop this now, if you make us return the money, we'll lose the house. We'll lose everything. Is that what you want? You want your grandchildren to be homeless?" I stared at my son. This man I'd raised, who I'd sacrificed for, who I'd loved unconditionally. And I saw a stranger. A weak, desperate stranger who'd just sold his father's legacy without permission to bail himself out of debt he'd never even told me the full truth about. "Get your hands off me," I said quietly. He let go. I watched, powerless, as they loaded the rest of the cars. All 7 of them. The men avoided my eyes. They knew this wasn't right, but money talks, and apparently Brandon had paid them well for their discretion and speed. When the trailer pulled away, taking Thomas's life work with it, I walked into the house without a word. I went to my bedroom, the one place that was still mine, and I locked the door. Then I sat on the edge of my bed, in complete silence, and I felt something inside me break. Not my heart. My heart had broken when Thomas died. This was different. This was the breaking of my illusions, my naivety, my hope that my son was a good man. And in the space where those illusions had been, something cold and hard and absolutely clear settled in. They had crossed a line they could never uncross, and they were going to learn exactly what that meant. For the rest of that day, I stayed in my room. Tiffany knocked once, her voice syrupy. "Margaret, dinner's ready. It's your favorite, pot roast." I didn't answer. I heard Brandon's voice, quieter, more tentative. "Mom, please, let's talk about this. We did what we had to do. You'll understand eventually." I didn't answer him either. Let them think I was just sulking. Let them think I'd get over it. Let them think that their tears and their justifications would eventually wear me down, the way they always had before. They had no idea what I was actually doing in that room. I was making calls. Lots of calls. The first was to Thomas's best friend, Henry Patterson. Henry was a retired attorney, and he and Thomas had been close since college. When I told him what happened, the silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Margaret," he finally said, his voice tight with anger, "tell me you're not going to let them get away with this." "I'm not," I said. "That's why I'm calling you. I need help." "Whatever you need," he said immediately. Those cars were Tom's heart and soul. What they did is beyond disrespectful. It's criminal. "Can I actually press charges?" I asked. Henry was quiet for a moment. "It's complicated. The cars were in your name, but they're your son. If he claimed you gave verbal permission, it becomes a he said, she said situation, especially if the sale is already complete and the buyer was acting in good faith. But Margaret, there are other ways to handle this. Legal ways that will hurt them much more than a criminal case that might not go anywhere. Tell me, I said. And he did. For the next hour, Henry outlined exactly what I needed to do, what documents I needed to gather, what steps I needed to take. When I hung up, I had a plan. A clear, methodical, ironclad plan. My second call was to my younger sister, Patricia. Patricia lived 2 states away, but we'd always been close. When I told her what happened, she was furious. "Pack a bag," she said immediately. "Come stay with me, get out of that house." "Not yet," I said. "If I leave now, they'll think they won. I need to stay long enough to put things in motion. But Pat, I need you to be ready. When this all comes to a head, I'm going to need a place to go." "My door is always open," she said, "always." My third call was to my bank. I'd been letting Brandon handle some of my finances, another mistake, and I needed to know exactly what I was working with and make sure everything was locked down tight. The bank officer was helpful and discreet. By the end of the call, I'd changed all my passwords, removed Brandon's name from any accounts where he'd been listed as a secondary holder, and set up alerts for any unusual activity. My fourth call was to a real estate appraiser. My house was worth about $1.2 million. The real estate market in our area had exploded over the past few years. I wanted an updated, official appraisal. The appraiser could come the following week. My final call of the evening was to a private investigator. Henry had recommended her, a woman named Sarah Chen who specialized in financial investigations. I hired her to dig into Brandon and Tiffany's finances. I wanted to know exactly how they'd gotten $75,000 in debt. I wanted to know where that $850,000 from the car sale was actually going. And I wanted documentation of everything. By the time I finished my calls, it was nearly midnight. I was exhausted. My jaw still ached from the dental work, but I felt clearer than I had in months, maybe years. I opened my bedroom door and went to the kitchen for some water. Brandon was sitting at the table in the dark, waiting. He looked up when I walked in, his eyes red. "Mom," he said, standing up. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know I should have asked. I know those cars meant everything to you. But I was desperate. We were going to lose everything. I thought you'd understand." I poured my water slowly, not looking at him. When I finally turned around, my face must have shown something because he actually took a step back. "You're right about one thing," I said, my voice level and cold. "You should have asked, but you didn't, because you knew I'd say no. So you went behind my back, you violated my trust, you sold your father's legacy like it was garbage at a yard sale, and you did it while I was at the dentist, so I couldn't stop you. That's not desperation, Brandon. That's betrayal. Mom, please." "I'm not finished," I cut him off. "You want to talk about understanding? Let me help you understand something. Your father spent 40 years building that collection. 40 years. Every car was a piece of his soul. And you sold all of them in an afternoon to fix problems you created. You didn't lose your job. You didn't have a medical emergency. You spent yourselves into debt. And instead of facing the consequences, you stole from me." "I didn't steal," he protested weakly. "The money. We split it. Half is in an account for you." I laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. "You split the money from my cars that you sold without my permission, and you think that makes it better? You think I wanted that money? I wanted the cars, Brandon. I wanted my husband's legacy. I wanted to sit in his Cobra and feel close to him. Your $425,000 doesn't bring that back." He was crying now, but I felt nothing. The tears that might have moved me a week ago just looked like manipulation now. "We're done with this conversation," I said. "Go to bed." I walked past him and went back to my room, locking the door behind me. I heard him standing outside for a few minutes, maybe hoping I'd relent, maybe hoping I'd open the door and forgive him. I didn't. Eventually, his footsteps retreated. That was the last real conversation I had with my son for a long time. Over the next 2 weeks, I played the part. I was civil at meals. I was polite but distant. I didn't bring up the cars. I let them think the storm had passed, that I was processing it, that eventually I'd come around. Brandon seemed relieved. Tiffany was positively cheerful, already talking about a vacation they were planning. Turks and Caicos, she said, showing me pictures on her phone of a resort that cost $800 a night. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I was busy. Sarah Chen, the private investigator, was worth every penny. Within 10 days, she'd compiled a comprehensive report on Brandon and Tiffany's finances, and what she found was worse than I'd imagined. The $75,000 in credit card debt? That was just the tip of the iceberg. They had a second mortgage on their rental property that was underwater. They had 2 car loans at predatory interest rates for a BMW and a Mercedes that were way beyond their means. Tiffany had over $40,000 in personal shopping debt, luxury handbags, jewelry, spa treatments, designer clothes. Brandon had been investing in cryptocurrency on margin and had lost over $60,000. And here's the kicker. Out of the $850,000 from the car sale, they'd only paid off about $180,000 in debt. The rest? Gone. $200,000 down payment on a vacation property in Miami that Tiffany had been eyeing. $150,000 in the stock market, which Brandon was convinced he could day trade his way to millions. Another $100,000 scattered across various expenses. The upcoming vacation, new furniture for my house, a home theater system they'd had installed in the basement without asking me. The remaining $220,000 was sitting in an account with my name on it, but I had no access to it. They'd set it up as a trust for me, with Brandon as the trustee. In other words, they'd stolen my cars, given me a portion of the proceeds, but structured it so I couldn't actually touch the money without their approval. When I finished reading Sarah's report, I sat at my desk and felt the last tiny shred of sympathy I had for my son evaporate like morning dew in the desert sun. The real estate appraiser came. My house was now worth $1.4 million, even higher than I'd thought. The neighborhood had gotten very desirable. Young professionals were moving in, and developers were buying up properties. I met with Henry Patterson in his office. I brought all my documents, the deed to the house, which was solely in my name, my financial records, Sarah's investigation report, my existing will, which left everything to Brandon. I want to change everything, I told Henry. I want them out of my house, and I want to make sure they never get their hands on another penny of mine. Henry nodded, his expression grim. I can do that. But Margaret, I have to warn you, this will be nuclear. Once you pull this trigger, there's no going back. Your relationship with your son will probably never recover. There's nothing to recover, I said. The son I raised would never have done what he did. I don't know who that man living in my house is, but he's not the boy I loved. All right then, Henry said, pulling out a legal pad. Let's get to work. Over the next week, Henry prepared documents for me. A new will, first and foremost. In it, I left $50,000 to each of my grandchildren, Emma and Jake, to be held in trust until they turned 25 and used only for education or starting a business. Everything else, my house, my savings, my investments, everything worth about $2.3 million was going to charity. Specifically, I was creating a foundation in Thomas's name to provide scholarships for underprivileged students interested in automotive technology and restoration. Brandon and Tiffany, they got nothing, not a penny. But the will was just the beginning. Henry also prepared eviction papers. Yes, I was evicting my own son. In our state, even family members living in your home without a lease are considered tenants, and I had the right to ask them to leave. I was giving them 60 days, which was more than the legal minimum. Finally, Henry sent a formal demand letter to the buyer of Thomas's cars and to Brandon and Tiffany. The letter outlined that the cars had been sold without the owner's consent, that the sale constituted theft, and that I was demanding either the return of the Vehicles or full restitution of their appraised value of $900,000, the current market value, not the sale price, plus damages for emotional distress. Was I going to win that lawsuit? Probably not, Henry admitted. The buyer had acted in good faith, and the cars were likely long gone, scattered to other collectors. But the letter would scare the hell out of them, and more importantly, it would establish a legal record of what they'd done. I signed everything. The new will was notarized and filed. The eviction notice was prepared. The demand letter was sent. And then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, on a Saturday morning, Brandon came into the kitchen where I was having coffee and reading the newspaper. He was holding papers in his shaking hand, his face ashen. "Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is this?" I looked up calmly. "What is what, dear?" He slammed the papers on the table. This eviction notice. You're kicking us out." I took a sip of my coffee. "Yeah, you can't do that. This is our home." "No," I said, meeting his eyes. "This is my home. Your guests who have severely overstayed your welcome. You have 60 days. Tiffany came running in, her face red, waving her own copy of the papers. "Are you insane? You can't evict us. We have children. We paid off our debts with that car money. We don't have anywhere to go." "You should have thought about that," I said, turning the page of my newspaper, "before you stole from me." "We didn't steal," Brandon shouted. "We sold property that belonged to the family." I set down the paper and stood up. I was done playing nice. "Those cars belonged to me. Not to you. Not to the family. To me. They were titled in my name. They were in my garage. And you sold them without my permission while I was at the dentist. That's theft, Brandon. That's what the police would call it, and that's what any judge would call it." "We gave you half the money," Tiffany screeched. "Money I can't access because you set it up in a trust you control. And even if I could access it, it wouldn't matter. I didn't want money. I wanted my husband's cars." Brandon was shaking. "Mom, this is crazy. We're family. Family doesn't do this to each other." "You're absolutely right," I said, my voice ice cold. "Family doesn't sell each other's most precious possessions behind their backs. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't betray trust. But you did all of those things. So clearly, your definition of family is very different from mine." Tiffany's mask finally dropped completely. Her face twisted with rage. "You ungrateful bitch. We took you in when you were all alone. We gave you a family again. We let you live with us, and this is how you repay us?" I actually laughed. "You took me in? This is my house, Tiffany, mine. I owned it free and clear before you ever set foot in here. You didn't let me live with you. I let you live with me. And I didn't charge you a penny in rent. I paid for half the groceries. I paid for the utilities. I helped with the kids. And all of that still wasn't enough for you, so you stole from me. The only ungrateful person in this room is you." Brandon tried a different approach. He softened his voice, tried to look remorseful. "Mom, I know we messed up, but kicking us out? Isn't that too extreme? Can't we work this out?" "There's nothing to work out. You have 60 days. I suggest you start packing." "And if we refuse?" Tiffany said, her jaw set. "What then? You'll drag us out? Have the sheriff throw your own son on the street?" "If necessary," I said calmly. "I will absolutely have the sheriff remove you. Don't test me." They stood there, stunned. They'd never seen this side of me. The mother and mother-in-law they knew was soft, accommodating, eager to keep the peace. They didn't know this woman, the one who'd spent 35 years in emergency rooms, dealing with everything from belligerent drunks to violent psych patients. The one who'd learned to set iron boundaries and stick to them no matter what. "This isn't over," Tiffany hissed. "You're right," I said. "It's not. You should also check your mail. You'll find a letter from my attorney demanding full restitution for the cars. We're suing you for $900,000 plus damages." Brandon's face went gray. You're suing us?" "I am. You stole my property. Now you'll face the consequences." "We'll countersue," Tiffany shouted. "We'll say you're mentally incompetent. We'll tell everyone you're a bitter old woman who's losing her mind." I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Go ahead. I've already had a full psychiatric evaluation. I'm of completely sound mind. I have documentation of everything. The car's ownership, the sale without my consent, your financial situation, where the money went. My attorney has it all. You, on the other hand, have nothing except a very weak claim that I gave you verbal permission, which we both know is a lie. I picked up my coffee and headed toward the door, then paused. Oh, and one more thing. You might want to sit down before you read the rest of the documents you'll be getting. I've changed my will. Just thought you should know. I left them standing in the kitchen and went to my room. Through the door, I could hear them erupting, shouting, cursing, blaming each other. Tiffany was screaming that Brandon was weak, that he should have handled his mother better. Brandon was yelling back that she was the one who'd pushed for selling the cars, that this was all her fault. I didn't care. I sat in my room, sipped my coffee, and felt an enormous weight lift off my shoulders. The next 60 days were pure hell, but I was prepared for it. Brandon and Tiffany tried everything. First, they tried guilt. They'd have the kids come talk to me, and Emma, sweet Emma, would look at me with tears in her eyes and say, "Grandma, why are you being so mean to Mommy and Daddy?" It broke my heart, but I held firm. Sweetheart, sometimes grown-ups make very serious mistakes, and there are consequences. Your parents made a mistake, and now they have to find a new place to live. But this isn't about you. I love you very much, and I always will. When guilt didn't work, they tried intimidation. Tiffany's brother, a large man with tattoos and a criminal record, showed up at my house one evening. "We need to talk," he said, blocking my doorway. I didn't flinch. "I don't know you, and you're trespassing. Leave now, or I'm calling the police. My sister says you're screwing over her family. Your sister is a thief who's facing a lawsuit. If you threaten me, I'll add harassment charges to the list. Now get off my property." He stared at me for a long moment, then apparently decided an elderly woman wasn't worth jail time. He left. They tried turning other family members against me. I got calls from cousins I hadn't heard from in years. All of them fed some sob story by Tiffany about how I was being unreasonable and cruel. I set the record straight with a few of them, but most I just didn't bother with. If they wanted to believe Tiffany without hearing my side, they weren't worth my time. They tried sabotaging my house. Small things like leaving taps running, accidentally breaking appliances, letting the kids draw on walls. I documented everything with photos and timestamps, and I sent the evidence to Henry. It would all help my case if they tried to fight the eviction. But the worst part, the part that actually hurt, was watching them pack. Watching Brandon move through the house like a ghost, hollow-eyed and defeated. Watching Emma and Jake confused and scared. I loved those kids. I didn't want them to suffer. But I also knew that staying soft, giving in, would only teach them that there are no consequences for bad behavior. On day 58, 2 days before the deadline, they were finally ready to go. They'd rented a small 3-bedroom house about 40 minutes away, much less nice than my place, in a less desirable area, but it was what they could afford with their now ruined credit and depleted savings. The moving truck was loaded. The house was mostly empty of their belongings. Brandon came to find me one last time. I was in the garden, pruning roses. "Mom," he said quietly. I looked up. He looked like he'd aged 10 years. There was gray at his temples I'd never noticed before, deep lines around his mouth. "I just want you to know," he said, his voice catching. "I never meant to hurt you. I was desperate. I made a terrible choice, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Part of me wanted to hug him. Part of me wanted to say it was okay, that we could fix this. But I didn't, because it wasn't okay, and we couldn't fix it. "I know you're sorry," I said. "But being sorry doesn't undo what you did. It doesn't bring back those cars. It doesn't restore my trust in you. You betrayed me in the worst possible way, and now you have to live with that. So that's it? You're just done with me? I'm your son. You are my son, but you're also a grown man who made his own choices. You chose to steal from me. You chose to disrespect your father's memory. You chose your wife's spending habits over your mother's well-being. Those were your choices, Brandon. Now you get to live with the consequences. He stood there for a moment longer, maybe hoping I'd change my mind. When I didn't, when I just went back to pruning my roses, he turned and walked away. I heard the moving truck start up. I heard it pull away. I heard Tiffany's car follow, and then, finally, blessed silence. I was alone in my house again, but this time it felt different. It felt like mine, like I'd reclaimed something that had been taken from me. That evening I called Patricia. "They're gone," I said. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Free," I said, and I meant it. The lawsuit moved forward, though as Henry had predicted, it was complicated. The buyer of the cars had acted in good faith and had already sold most of them to other collectors. We'd probably end up with a settlement. Henry was hoping for maybe $200,000 or $300,000, enough to hurt but not destroy them. But honestly, the money wasn't the point. The point was making sure they understood what they'd done, making sure there was a consequence. As for my will, I made sure Brandon knew the details. I had Henry send him a certified letter outlining the new terms, everything to charity except the trusts for the kids. Brandon called me after he got the letter. "You're really doing this?" he said. 0328. "You're really cutting me out completely?" "I am," I said. "Because of the cars?" "Because of what the cars represented." "You showed me who you really are, Brandon. You showed me that you see me as a bank account, not as a person. You showed me that you value money more than integrity. You showed me that you don't respect me or your father's memory. Why would I leave my life savings to someone like that?" He had no answer. He hung up without another word. 6 months passed. I renovated the house, erasing any trace of Brandon and Tiffany's presence. I converted the garage into a beautiful workshop space and donated it to a local nonprofit that teaches at-risk youth automotive skills, a tribute to Thomas that felt right. I saw Emma and Jake occasionally. Brandon would drop them off for a few hours, and we'd bake cookies or go to the park. I never badmouthed their parents in front of them, but I also never pretended everything was fine. When Emma asked why they didn't live with me anymore, I said simply, "Sometimes people make choices that hurt others, and when that happens, things have to change." She seemed to accept that. Brandon and Tiffany's marriage didn't survive. The stress of the lawsuit, the financial problems, the eviction, it was too much. Last I heard, they were separated, probably headed for divorce. Brandon was living in a studio apartment, working 2 jobs to pay his lawyer and keep up with child support. Did I feel bad? A little. He's still my son. But I also felt vindicated. He'd made his bed, and now he was lying in it. As for me, I'm thriving. I started dating again. A widower I met at a Thomas Hayes Foundation scholarship event. He's kind, funny, and most importantly, he has his own money and his own house. We're taking it slow, but it's nice to have companionship again. I travel. I volunteer. I spend time with my friends. I spoil my grandkids when I see them. And I sleep peacefully every night, knowing that my money will go to people who deserve it, who need it, who'll use it to build something good. I used to think the greatest legacy I could leave was to give everything to my child. Now I know better. The greatest legacy is living a life of integrity, setting boundaries and making sure that even in death, your values are honored. Brandon stole my husband's cars. In doing so, he lost his inheritance, his home, and his relationship with his mother. That might seem harsh to some people, but I sleep well at night, knowing I did the right thing. Some people will tell you that family is everything, that you should forgive anything, that blood is thicker than water. But I've learned that the full quote is, "The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb." The bonds we choose are stronger than the bonds we're born into, and I choose to protect myself, my values, and my late husband's memory. If my son couldn't respect that, then he doesn't deserve my forgiveness or my fortune. The lesson in all of this? Simple. In your later years, protect yourself. Set boundaries. Don't let anyone, not even your own children, take advantage of your kindness. And most importantly, remember that you owe your adult children love, but you don't owe them your dignity, your peace, or your life savings. I'm Margaret Hayes, and I took my life back, and I've never been happier.